This video is brought to you by GiveWell. All around the world, economies are struggling to contend with the ongoing cost of living crisis. Workers are seeing their earnings eaten away by high levels of inflation, homeowners are seeing their mortgage repayments rise due to high interest rates, and families are seeing their weekly food shop costs soar. Here in the UK, though, things do seem to be doing quite a bit worse, especially when we compare the UK to other similar countries. Middle-income Brits are 20% poorer than their peers in Germany, and 9% poorer than their peers in France. And it's not just the middle-income earners that are struggling. Low-income households are around 27% poorer than low-income households in France and Germany. It wasn't always like this either. Between 1970 and 2007, real wages in the UK grew by an average of 33% per decade, but since 2010, the growth has fallen to zero. This means that not only are UK workers worse off than their counterparts, but they're worse off than the generation of workers above them. So in this video, we're going to have a look at exactly how much worse off Britain's workers are, why wages have stagnated, and what other countries are doing better. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. It's worth starting this video by explaining that a lot of the analysis from this video comes from the Resolution Foundation's detailed report on the economic situation in the UK. It's a great report and we've linked it down below if you want to read it in full. Anyway, as we mentioned in the intro, the headline finding from the report is that workers in the UK are worse off than their counterparts and from generations above them. According to the report, the decline in wage growth over the past 15 years has cost the average UK worker over £10,000 per year. The Resolution Foundation points to two main factors to explain why UK workers are doing so badly at the moment: low growth and high inequality. Let's have a look at each of these issues in turn. The issue of low growth has become a real talking point in UK politics. Perhaps most notable was Liz Truss, who justified all her unorthodox economic policies in the name of growth, and even mockingly described her opponents as the anti-growth coalition. While her premiership failed and her mini-budget was reversed, her basic premise that one of the fundamental issues in the UK economy is low GDP growth has become cross-party consensus. So what is growth and why is it such an issue for the UK? Well, in essence, growth is the increase in the value of GDP, the total goods and services produced by an economy. In general, people and politicians are keen on growth for two reasons. First, higher growth usually means higher wages and living standards. And second, higher growth means larger tax revenues for the government, which means better public services. Unfortunately, the UK hasn't fared particularly well in this respect, and the main issue seems to be productivity. Back in the 1970s, UK productivity, measured as GDP per hour of work, was roughly two-thirds of that of the US. While UK productivity was behind that of France and Germany, it slowly gained on them in the decades that followed, but since 2008, UK productivity has fallen behind again. Between 2008 and 2022, the UK's productivity gap relative to France and Germany widened by 9%. This 9% drop accounts for around £3,400 in lost output per person in the UK. Now, figuring out why productivity has fallen is a difficult and contentious task, but it is relatively obvious that low investment is a big reason. In the 40 years leading up to 2022, the total amount of fixed investment in the UK averaged around 19% of GDP, which is the lowest in the G7. Since 2008, investment in the UK, as a percentage of GDP, has been 3 points lower than the G7 average. While low investment is a chronic problem for the UK that goes back decades, at least one of the reasons investment has struggled in recent years is Brexit and the political uncertainty that's accompanied it, which has made investing for the long term more difficult. This lower productivity also goes some way to explaining the UK's low wages, because in general, less productive workers get paid less. So let's move on to the second reason that the Resolution Foundation thinks is behind a lack of an increase in workers' wages: growing inequality. A crude measure of inequality is the Gini coefficient, which assigns each country a score, with 0 representing complete equality and 100 representing complete inequality. The Gini coefficient can be applied to either income or wealth, and the UK doesn't score great on either. After a spike in income inequality in the 1980s, the UK now has a higher Gini coefficient than the Netherlands, France, Italy, and Spain. On top of this, lower income earners have barely seen their wages rise in the last couple of decades, whereas those on higher incomes have seen their incomes rise massively. Middle-income earners are paid about 20% less than their French counterparts, but low-income earners are paid nearly 30% less, the equivalent of about £4,300 a year. Clearly, the recent decline in wages has hit lower-income earners harder, and their wages are even lower than their European counterparts. While measuring wealth inequality is a bit more difficult because the differences in wealth are enormous and some people have negative wealth, Credit Suisse data suggests that the UK has quite literally the worst wealth inequality of any large economy apart from Belgium. This is largely because overall wealth, especially at the top end of the spectrum, has grown massively. In the 1980s, total household wealth was roughly 3 times that of GDP, but by 2020 this has risen to 7 times. In practice, this means the UK has an economy that privileges assets over income. In other words, what you earn now matters less, and what you and your family own is mattering more and more. So those are the two main problems, low growth and high inequality. On to the final bit of this video. What can the UK government do to fix it? Well, while we don't have much time to go into this in much depth, although if you'd like a full video on how to fix the UK economy, leave a comment down below, the Resolution Foundation has a couple of recommendations. The first way is obviously increasing investment, or at least creating conditions that will encourage investment. Torsten Bell, the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, commented that less bonkers politics and sensible taxes will help on this front, but real change will require more pressure on management from above. But the main thing, according to the Resolution Foundation, is coming up with a very clear approach to the economy, which is clear about the trade-offs and which is large enough to actually fix some problems. Tinkering around the edges, which is what the government is currently doing, won't reverse these trends. There needs to be a more wide-ranging, comprehensive plan to address these problems. There are over 1.5 million non-profit organisations in the US, and millions more around the world. So how do you know which ones make the biggest impact with your donations? GiveWell was founded to help donors with that exact question. They spend tens of thousands of hours poring over independent studies and charity data to help donors direct their funds to evidence-based organisations that are saving and improving lives. In fact, GiveWell has now spent over 15 years researching charitable organisations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. That's things like vitamin A supplements, which cost as little as $1 to deliver, but can reduce vitamin A deficiency in children, thus improving mortality rates. Together, over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. In fact, in 2019, when we sold TLDR-branded pin badges for charity, we turned to GiveWell to help select the charities we donated to, ensuring the maximum impact of our giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. As such, you can find all their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Plus, if you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, pick YouTube and enter TLDR News at checkout. Do make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from TLDR News in order to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.